Welcome to Our House, the only complete on-air resource for your home ownership needs. Now, here's the host of Our House, Peter Hunt.
Good morning and welcome to Our House. This is Peter Hunt, and the show is brought to you by the continuously improving HuntRealEstate.com, where everything is truly easier for your real estate and home ownership experience. HuntRealEstate.com is powered by Hunt Real Estate ERA here in Buffalo, Niagara, and all across upstate New York, and also through our links to Boston, Massachusetts, and Phoenix, Arizona. The show is also brought to you by Hunt Mortgage, NMLS number 37405. Hunt Mortgage is an equal opportunity lender. Call them today, 633-3700, and ask one of our very skilled mortgage consultants to work with you to find the lowest rate and closing costs for your particular home financing needs and want. And that's always our guarantee. Also ask about our many exclusive programs, including our unique pre-purchase commitment that allows you at no risk or cost to effectively enter the market to find your next home with cash. And in today's very competitive real estate market, where there's a shortage of listings, when you find the house you want, you'll want to make sure that your offer is as strong as possible. When there's often more than one offer, from a seller's perspective, cash is very persuasive. So working with a skilled Hunt sales professional armed with your pre-purchase commitment, your offer is the equivalent of cash, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So to learn more, call Hunt Mortgage today, 633-3700 for personalized, customized service that will knock your socks off. Don't forget about the first ever 24/7, 365 real estate hotline, the Hunt Hotline, which gives you access to all available information about any property that's listed for sale here in Buffalo, Niagara, and all across the markets we serve. Our local number here in Western New York is 716-631-4800. Call that number, enter the street number of the house you want to know about, no matter whose listing it is. It doesn't have to be one of ours. And the Hunt Hotline will prompt you with a choice of street names. Select the one you want. You'll hear a brief description, and then you'll be texted a link to a dedicated website on that property. It's all automatic and just that fast. Anytime in any market we serve on any listing, whether it's ours or any other brokers. You know, today's for sale signs have pictures of agents, QR codes, phone numbers, web addresses, pictures. It's just plain confusing. Make it easy on yourself. Just remember the Hunt Hotline number, 631-4800, for complete information instantaneously. Hunt is the official real estate and relocation provider of our hometown professional teams, the Buffalo Bills, the Buffalo Sabres. We're also proud supporters of our Buffalo Bisons, and we're waiting for them to come back in the spring, obviously, here in Buffalo. Our house is broadcast live on WBEN 930 AM and also 98.5 FM HD3. And you can also listen live anywhere in the world, so tell your friends anywhere, through the Odyssey app and WBEN.com. And for those of you who would like to participate in today's show, if you have any questions or comments about any aspect of real estate or what we'll be discussing this morning, call or text us here in the studio at 803-0930. It's the same number. And if you're long distance, it's 1-800-616-9236. Mobile number is star 930. Those are all free calls, so join us on the air at our house. Well, we have a very special show for you today. My guest in the studio with me today is Corey Hogan. Mr. Hogan is an attorney with HoganWillig. Good morning, Corey.
Peter, great to be here.
It's good to have you here. So tell us, you're getting a fair amount of airtime these days based on some of the lawsuits you're involved with. But tell us a little bit about, they say this is Corey Hogan. Tell us who Corey Hogan is.
Well, Peter, I've lived my whole life in Western New York and raised 3 daughters, and I love the area. I have no interest in ever leaving. I've been a lawyer for, 40 years, and when this COVID-19 all began, probably in early 2020, we tried to continue the law firm. We've got about 40 lawyers and 40 paralegals in 5 different locations. We just wanted to mind our own business and practice law. The Attorney General had a different idea. They made it their business to watch our business, and when it got to a point where they had people outside in unmarked cars taking down plate numbers of individuals that were going to our office, I said that's enough. I was a little bit concerned about the way the whole process was being done, where the executive department was making rules, not necessarily a dictatorship, and in certain times you need to have the police power. But it was getting to a point where there was not really any pushback, and that kind of stuff, when people are keeping track of who's coming in, they would call us every day. They wanted to know what we were doing, why we couldn't do it from home, and got to a point where I said, you know what, I think I have to bring a claim. So we sued the state of New York, the Attorney General's office, and said, enough of this. So once we brought the lawsuit, They started leaving us alone, but then we were contacted by different Western New York businesses and individuals feeling that they were having a hard time keeping their heads above water. The first group were the hair salons. They were pretty much put in a position where they were shut down, and we ended up talking to a bunch of restaurant owners, and at that point they were told they couldn't do any indoor dining in Buffalo in the winter, so that would be impossible to keep their doors open. And as we got into it more and more, we learned more and more about this COVID-19 virus. We learned more and more about the FDA approval process, about the CDC, and gotten to a point where when something happens, we're contacted. Right now we've got a bunch of restaurants, some bowling alleys, a grocery store, fitness centers, hair salons, and they're all concerned about the most recent Mark Poloncar's mask mandate.
Let's go back to the executive order situation. What's the law behind those? I mean, we all know what happened. They started issuing these executive orders, but how do they get that power, and how do they maintain it?
Well, Cuomo declared the state of emergency in New York back in the spring of 2020, I think probably in March. And according to the Constitution of this state, that allows, under those circumstances, allows him to suspend certain laws for purposes of doing whatever has to be done to basically protect the citizens from whatever emergency. So if you have maybe a disastrous snowstorm, the governor declares a state of emergency, and they can prohibit parking, they can do things of that nature. Doesn't give them the power, though, to make new laws, but which is different, directives. But then the legislature, because they have been sitting back doing very little themselves over 2 years, they gave him the power to issue directives. So it got to a point where now you have an executive without any oversight, for the most part, making decisions as to what is best. And in a short term, with a true emergency, I don't think there's a better way of doing it. You don't have time to be debating issues. You've got to get something done. But when it starts stretching into months and it starts reaching into every area of one's life, that's where the Constitution says, the laws are supposed to be made by the legislature, enforced by the executive, and if things get a little bit haywire, the courts are supposed to step in and tell everybody that, we do have a democracy here, and this is how things are supposed to go.
The logic, if there is any, behind the executive actions is always blamed on science, or the science is what they say. It's all based on data and the science. You must have looked into this. What is the direct relationship between some of these executive orders and the science? For example, staying 6 feet apart.
Yeah, we were heavily involved in trying to get our kids back into school. Every piece of literature we read, every expert we talked to said in-person learning is essential. Trying to conduct school classes for kindergartners through 12th grade on a computer screen is simply not effective, and it really disproportionately hurts those kids that have less economic means. So this whole idea of keeping the kids out of schools, in theory, is supposed to revolve around the fact that if they go to school, there's going to be more transmission of the COVID-19 virus. So if you want to bear with me for a second, the whole idea behind the vaccine is that people think of a vaccine as something that you take you get an inoculation, and at that point, you're not going to get whatever it is that you're trying to be protected against. An annual flu shot, a measles shot, those kind of things. Here, people were never told this. I don't think most people understand that when these so-called emergency use orders were put out, authorizations, I should say, EUAs, the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson were only approved for purposes of reducing symptoms. They were never approved for purposes of stopping the infection itself or stopping transmissibility. They were only authorized for purposes of reducing symptoms because that's all they effectively did. Everybody still thinks they go in and get their booster at this point, that in theory this is supposed to prevent them from getting COVID-19. That's not what they're approved for. For maybe a couple months, they may work that way because they're specific to just one protein, the spike protein. There's probably about 30. Natural immunity works on all 30, but no one wants to talk about natural immunity and power. So natural immunity is far more powerful, and there's all kinds of studies that have shown that. But so what is happening is that it sounds like about after 4 months now, and maybe even before that, people who had the double vaccine shot or the single Johnson & Johnson were catching COVID. They were surprised, and were also transmitting it. And that was somewhat being suppressed until it got to a point where these so-called breakthrough infections were going on all over the place. Now, anybody that looked at the background here would have understood that that was inevitable. The same thing now is with the booster. The booster is designed to basically re-up your antibodies, but the booster is only effective against that initial variant. It will take. With respect to other variants that come along, it may work, but it may not. Natural immunity will, because not only is there that one spike protein that natural immunity is effective against, but like I said, the other 25 or 30 other antigens. And then it gets complicated with T cells and B cells, and I don't need to talk all about that. But it's clear that natural immunity is far more effective. And it's also clear at this point in terms of these vaccines that they are not going to prevent infection or transmissibility. So moving fast forward to Mark Poloncarz, you've got a mandate here that basically says, with respect to these restaurants, salons, and all those different businesses, that they've got to require masks. And that's another story. But a way around it is to set it up where you just allow people that are vaccinated to come into your business. But they also indicate in the same order that people with the vaccine catch and transmit COVID-19. So it's kind of like an Alice in Wonderland story here. We have a vaccine that people are pushing that really isn't the traditional vaccine. You've got people lining up now for boosters that'll probably be good. It looks like the initial studies are showing that booster is probably going to be good for maybe 2 months. So following the 2 months, we're going to be back to where we started. The only thing that's going to really work here is, to get to herd immunity, is natural immunity. Probably in this country, in this state, in this county, natural immunity is probably approaching 60%. The population has been infected. Most people, by far, survive. The individuals that are at risk are basically those like myself, anybody that's over 60, but typically has at least 3 or 4 other health issues, what they call comorbidities. So 90% of the deaths are within the population of age 60 or more, and that's in Erie County. And these are individuals that have typically 3 or 4 other health considerations. Kids, and this is what makes the school thing so wrong, is that kids are basically immune. They do not die. In Erie County, since this COVID-19 thing started, there has been 1 death of an individual under the age of 19. And even that, unfortunately, is a mess because they changed the way deaths are reported. It used to be if somebody said you died of COVID-19, you died of COVID-19. That brought about your death. Now, if you die with COVID-19, they consider that a COVID-19 death. And that's never happened before in terms of, so these deaths that we hear about, these are individuals that are tested at some point who had COVID-19 when they died. Whether COVID-19 brought about that death or not is an entirely other story. Probably half of these at least are not caused by COVID-19.
I'm going to go back to that in a second, but let's go back to the beginning here. What we hear constantly is that if you wear a mask, you get a vaccine, one of the 3. And by the way, somebody texted in that Johnson & Johnson vaccine is based on a spike protein, but the Moderna and Pfizer are based on a nuclear material. Is that true?
Well, those 2 are based upon this mRNA process, which is new. It had been tested on animals, and not necessarily always with good results. Never used on human beings, and that's why people are reluctant, not everybody, but a lot of people are reluctant to go ahead and get the vaccine. If you're a kid and you know basically that you can get the virus and you'll probably go through it fine. It's not like it's something you want, but if it gets to you, you have natural immunity and you're probably going to deal with it. But somewhere in the range of 40% of individuals that are, let's say, under the age of 50 don't even know they have it. The symptoms are so mild they don't have it. I've got 3 daughters who I love dearly. They've all had their Pfizer vaccines. One at least now, even after the vaccine, caught COVID. She went through it. She couldn't taste for a few days, but now she has natural immunity. So she's a prime example of an individual that had the double vaccine, a kid. She still got it regardless of the vaccine, which makes sense in terms of if you look why they were only approved. It's also interesting. She's at Duke Law School, and up there, everybody's mandated. And it's not like this. I'm picking on Erie County. It's not only Erie County. It's New York. It's the United States of America. It's every country in the world that's overreacting to this. But at Duke, everybody was mandated to have a vaccine. 1 week, they had about 260 kids that tested positive for COVID-19. They all were double vaccinated. So it's starting to leak out. People are starting to say, you know what? This thing isn't what it's cracked up to be. What am I putting in my body? And we have no problem if people want to take the vaccine. The issue is going to be, should we jam it down somebody's throat if they don't want to?
I keep coming back to this, and I want this to be, you to straighten this out.
Sure.
We hear about 3 things: stay away from people 6 feet apart, and going to the school thing, they moved all the desks apart and that kind of thing. Require a vaccine, and you touched on that a little bit. And the third thing is masks. Beyond that, there's very little guidance that comes from any place. So let's deal with each one of those. Is there truth in staying 6 feet apart?
Sure. That's why when you talk about it, the ventilation is probably the number one tool to prevent the spread of COVID. So if you crack a window, that is in a schoolroom, that's more effective than all these masks these kids are wearing, because I'll hit masks. The studies that we've read, and we have an epidemiologist that we're working with, a PhD epidemiologist, a number of physicians. The mask studies are real clear that they're probably going to be effective is at the most 10%. And let me give you a reason why. When people wear masks, they don't understand that unless they're wearing an N95, that the size of the COVID-19 virus it's in microns. You can't see it. It's about 1/500th the size of the distance between the threads in most masks that people wear. One of the analogies, it's like trying to prevent a mosquito from getting in your room by a chain link fence. It doesn't work. It goes right through it. And people, when you take a look at them wearing masks, you see the air escaping out the side, up their nose, down out their throat. That doesn't work. It's not going to. The masks are not effective. It's the first thing that public officials go to because they have some need, I guess, to show that they can do something. But it doesn't work.
But it doesn't do anything, is what you're saying. Is there any evidence after all this time that periods of time where masks have been mandated, that there's any slower spread during those periods of time than when we, quote, go to greater freedoms?
Yeah, the studies I've seen basically indicate when they take a look at 2 different populations at 2 different locations, similar people, one population wearing masks, one not wearing masks, there's no difference. So wearing masks is an attempt at making people feel good. It's a placebo. It doesn't work. It's not effective. But if people want to wear them, they can wear them.
To that point, we have one person texting twice here that says that your guest is putting out incorrect, dangerous information to the public. Mm-hmm. Please ask to have one of the doctors that Susan and Brian have on their show. I'm sure you've listened to these doctors. You just mentioned that you have an epidemiologist or an immunologist on your
an epidemiologist, yes, who takes a look at studies. He's a PhD epidemiologist that's looking at the studies that are being done all over the world. And as well as a number of physicians. And this idea that somehow as an attorney, I'm not allowed to read the studies. and I'm not allowed to do something that very few people are doing. I wonder myself, is Mark Poloncarz, is Gail Bernstein, is Dr. Fauci, are they actually reading the studies, and are they providing that information to the public? Let me even talk to you about these hospital beds in Erie County. Now they talk about staffed beds. They didn't used to use that term. Well, there's about 3,000 beds in Erie County. We're down to about 2,000. Staffed because of the fact that the mandate by our governor requiring that everybody be vaccinated in the health industry, and we got a lawsuit going on in Albany on that. But the mandate is that if you're not vaccinated, you're going to be fired. So nurses galore have been fired. Not everyone, maybe 10%. But the reality of it is that when they talk about COVID-19 patients filling up hospital beds, you've got about 1,000 beds taken offline, and you have maybe somewhere in the range of those 2,000 beds, 200 COVID patients. Not 2,000. You've got 1,800 other people that are there for whatever the reasons are. But to blame the hospital bed shortage on people that either don't wear masks or aren't vaccinated is totally unfair, ludicrous, and it's wrong. And I challenge anybody to talk about that.
Let's go back to kids in school for a second here. I know that's been a hot button for you. You mentioned just a while ago. The other side of that argument against having kids in school is the risk to the teachers themselves, that these kids go home and they catch something at home. They're not symptomatic. They come into school and they spread it to the teachers. How valid is that?
Well, it's valid to the extent that, but when we went there was vaccines available. So all the teachers that wanted to be vaccinated could have been vaccinated. Now, the reality of it is being vaccinated isn't going to typically protect you in the long term from catching COVID-19. But at the time, that wasn't what the story was. The story was if you get vaccinated, you're free. You're not going to catch it, and that is a bold-faced lie. Starting with the president, President Biden, going down to the governor and to the county executive. People should be told that these vaccines have not been approved for purposes of preventing infection or transmissibility. They've been approved for purposes of reducing symptomology, and that may be a good thing if that's true. There's nothing wrong if you're going to get it to have it less serious than if you're not.
We have to go to a break in just about 40 seconds here, but this story that you're telling, and I'm not saying it's a story, but the evidence that you're providing and your research flies in the face of just about every single thing that we hear continuously night and day. And I want to go back. This is a show about real estate, so I want to go back to what you said right off the bat, which is the effect on retail businesses. If those retail businesses go out of business or can't have customers, they can't pay their rent. If they can't pay their rent, the value of that property immediately goes down. And I don't think we've begun to calculate the net impact of this on the retail market and also the office market, which is substantial. We do have to go to a break. We'll be right back with more from our house after these important messages.
When it comes to buying a home, you can count on Hunt Mortgage to help you find a loan that fits your unique needs. Only Hunt Mortgage offers you a $1,000 pre-purchase commitment guarantee, which gives you a competitive edge when putting in your offer on a home. At Hunt Mortgage, we'll make your home financing experience efficient, easy, and stress-free. Put our generation of experience to work for you. Apply online today at huntmortgage.com. Guarantee terms and conditions apply. Hunt Mortgage is a licensed mortgage banker, NMLS 37405, New York Department of Financial Services, and an equal opportunity lender.
Welcome back to our house. This is Peter Hunt, and the show is brought to you by the ever-increasing, ever-improving HuntRealEstate.com, where everything is truly easier for your real estate and home ownership experience. HuntRealEstate.com is the only place on the web where you can find a complete inventory of homes available in all the markets we serve, and you'll also find access to a complete set of home ownership services at HuntRealEstate.com, which is powered by Hunt Real Estate ERA. The show is also brought to you by Hunt Mortgage, and for more information about our exclusive program that is your assurance of the lowest rate and closing costs, called the Second Look Program, call today 633-3700 for details. If you watch television at all and you're going to be inundated, or you open up your computer, turn your phone on, you're inundated with mortgage offerings, particularly to refinance your current program. How are you going to know if you're getting the very best deal? Well, let us take a second look. That's how you know. The Hunt Mortgage Second Look Program. There's no risk or cost, and we're so convinced this will help you. You'll even receive a gift certificate just for allowing us to take that second look, and we've just doubled the amount of that gift certificate. So honestly, it's the easiest thing in the world to do. 633-3700, and you'll find out really the truth about the rate and closing costs for your particular needs, and we guarantee that you'll know at the end of that meeting whether you've got the best deal available. Also ask about our pre-purchase commitment and even our warm home loan only at Hunt Mortgage, 633-3700. We have a very special show today. My guest in the studio is Corey Hogan, an attorney with HoganWillig. We've been talking about, I guess the best way to describe it is what your research shows versus what we're told every day, and it's really a shocking difference. So let's go back. We were talking about the threat to teachers. This is a big deal because the teachers have largely been the ones that have been behind, and perhaps rightly so from their perspective, the push early on to close schools. And it wasn't just teachers; it was administrators as well. We couldn't take the risk. If little Johnny got sick, he took it home and made grandma sick. This is what the county executive was saying all along, that it's not so much the child that's the concern. It's when they go home to see grandma and they make her sick and she dies. Was there any validity in that, or is it fair to say that because there was no vaccine at that point in time and that spread was taking place, was there validity to be that concerned? Was there a reason to shut down schools?
Not in my mind. And if this is something that the legislature debated, and you had hearings and you had experts come in and talk, and you ended up passing a law that said this is what we're going to do, that maybe then you've got a fair decision being made. But these school shutdowns were being made by single individuals, whether they're the county executive, school superintendents, the Department of Health. What is really taking place, and Governor Cuomo, he had a December 11th, 2020 press conference, and he said, now we're going to be just looking at the science. And he came out, and I've got a chart with me. It says, by the facts.
That's after the vaccines were announced.
This was in December, of 2020, about a year ago. And he said, we've done contact tracing. We've got 46,000 data points. And as it turns out, transmission is taking place 75% within homes, households. All of the rest of it, 8% was in healthcare delivery, so now you're about 83%. All of the rest of it is spread out throughout any other institution. At that time, when we represented hair salons, their spread was 0.14%. It wasn't even 1%. Restaurants were 1.4%. I'm going to show you a couple of things, Peter, so you can put it on the air to your people. But this was a scientific analysis by the state. When we use that to get the restaurants open, as far as indoor dining, when we said it's safer to eat in a restaurant, and it really is, because they've got ventilation, they've got sanitation, than in your own home, that they stopped giving the information out. We have been asking for contact tracing data from the state, Department of Health, and any agency we can think of for almost 10 months now. We brought a lawsuit to get it. They threw it out and said, you've got to go through the administrative process. So then we went through the administrative process. We started asking for this information back in June. We got a letter 3 months ago from the Department of Health, September 16th, saying, well, it's going to take us until November 22nd to give you that information. They could give us that information in a minute. They have it. Then on November 22nd, we got a letter from the Department of Health, says the records are being reviewed now for applicable exemptions, privileges, and responsiveness. Now we want until January 26th. Why would the state keep information from its citizens that tells them where the most transmissions are taking place, where it's safe to go and where it isn't safe to go?
What's the answer to that?
They don't want people to understand that the real problem is not anything else but the fact that this is like the flu, a common cold. We're not going to be able to suppress it unless there's a vaccine that's developed, maybe, not that I've heard of, that actually prevents the infection itself. And even then it's problematic. We have not figured out a way to stop the common cold. It's a virus. This is a virus.
It's the same, right? It's coronavirus. Common cold is.
The good thing is that at least this is not like a smallpox, where you have a 30% death rate. I'm going to show you something else that I got from the county here. I brought this. This is an Erie County Department of Health Office of Epidemiology for the week ending November 27th. What it says here, that we've got deaths going from January through November this year. It says the average age at death of people, even with their distorted numbers, is at this point 76. That is the average age of death. And it talks about, shows that all the deaths are concentrated within 60 to and beyond. What we should be doing is protecting those people. No one is suggesting that people aren't dying from COVID or with COVID. The issue is, what cost does society pay to prevent this from occurring? How do we protect these people?
Let's go to the cost for just a second here, because the ripple effect through the economy is
humongous.
Is humongous. And when you've pressed our elected officials or appointed officials or people in the health departments, the local, state level, when you've pressed them for this evidence that you're talking about here, and they stonewall you, or they push it aside, or they just pat you on the head and hope you'll go away.
Sure.
What possible motivation? Do they look at the calculated effect of these decisions to close down whole institutions, whole types of and by type? It's like one type of business can stay open, another one can't. How do they, when you speak to them and when you do your research, how is this rationalized?
I think that many of these people honestly believe that what they're doing is correct. I can't believe that there's this massive conspiracy going on across the world.
Well, let's assume they do think it's correct.
Mm-hmm.
They still think the new health commissioner for the state of New York came on the air 2 days ago and said, what you got to do is wear a mask and get a vaccination.
Right.
That was it?
Well, because at the end of the day, it's a virus, and what happens with these viruses historically, scientifically, is that they have a tendency they always end up with new variants. There's just too many generations and generations, so they change a little bit. Typically, they become more transmissible, which makes sense. The ones that continue to dominate are the ones that are more transmissible than the other ones. But they also usually are less serious, because in terms of the fatality rate and things of that nature, because typically if you kill your host, the virus dies too. So the way that nature works typically doesn't mean it has to be. Doesn't mean you couldn't get a more serious one. But generally speaking, it's going to be more transmissible. So when they came out with this Delta variant being more transmissible, and now the Omicron one, no one is talking about anybody dying or being in the hospital. They're scaring people by simply saying, oh my God, it's more transmissible. We have another one. Of course there's going to be another one. And there'll be another one after that. The issue is, can we stop something like that? Or do we take a look at it and say, how do we protect the people that are most at risk? We're lucky that it's not that much of a killer. The infection fatality rate is probably going to end up being somewhere along the lines of what the flu is, somewhere in the range of about 0.2%, and we're getting better and better at treating. So going back to your school question, these kids, the psychological damage to these kids, from every neuropsychologist, psychologist I've talked to, is been so large that there's a concern whether they'll recover from it, a lot of these kids. The number of kids that are going for counseling, the suicide attempts, all of that stuff is tied into keeping them at home. And the issue is, what benefit did we get? I don't think there was any benefit. As far as grandma is concerned that you talked about, somebody that's older and has a number of comorbidities, yeah, that person, how do you protect her? I guess you protect her by getting a vaccine, so presumably that reduces the symptoms, and she's going to have to kind of remain isolated.
So your advice, cutting through everything, is to protect those most at risk.
The Great Barrington Declaration up in Massachusetts, there was a Stanford physician, Oxford, and one other, and they said when it started that the way to deal with this from a society's perspective is to treat it like the flu. Protect the vulnerable population, but make smart decisions, but don't shut down society, because those costs are not easily seen, but they're there. And that also results in the loss of lives. Now, people don't like to hear this, but you know how many people die each year from hunger? 6 million. Every year. You know how many kids die from hunger every year? 3 million. So every year. And that's preventable. So when you talk about things that could be done that have a benefit, food is a lot cheaper than what's going on. I think the cost, I computed it, every day it's $17 million a day the country is spending on the vaccine stuff a day.
That the government is spending.
Yeah, well, the taxpayers are spending. The government is us.
Well, of course, but I mean, it's
when the government does something,
comes from us to the government and then it's paid out for whatever reason.
The Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, yeah. And so that's a cost, but that pales in comparison to the economic damage that has been taking place because of this.
We're going to have to go to a break, but we got a bunch of callers and a bunch of texters going on here, and it seems to me that we've hit a hot button here. So we'll be back with more from our house after these important messages.
When it comes to buying a home, you can count on Hunt Mortgage to help you find a loan that fits your unique needs. Only Hunt Mortgage offers you a $1,000 pre-purchase commitment guarantee, which gives you a competitive edge when putting in your offer on a home. At Hunt Mortgage, we'll make your home financing experience efficient, easy, and stress-free. Put our generation of experience to work for you. Apply online today at huntmortgage.com. Guarantee terms and conditions apply. Hunt Mortgage is a licensed mortgage banker, NMLS 37405, New York Department of Financial Services, and an equal opportunity lender.
Welcome back to our house. This is Peter Hunt, and the show is brought to you by the ever-improving HuntRealEstate.com, where everything's truly easier for your real estate and home ownership experience. The show is also brought to you by Hunt Mortgage, home of the pre-purchase commitment, the second look program, and the warm home loan. Call them today, 633-3700. I'm live in the studio this morning with Corey Hogan, an attorney with Hogan Willig, who's done a fair amount of research based on lawsuits he's started against various municipalities and others. And I want to ask you a question, now that we're back on the air here, Corey, about Mark Poloncarz, the county executive, announced that he would require people to wear masks in restaurants, grocery stores, gyms, and other places. That was effective on November 23rd because of soaring COVID-19 hospitalizations in the county. Were they soaring?
No. The positivity rate was at somewhere between 9 and 10%. And what
that's of tests, correct?
Right. That is basically people that think they have COVID, they get tested, 9 or 10% are positive. I don't know why that is so relevant to anything, because that it is so affected by the number of people that do it, how hard people are pushed to get tested. It has nothing to do, in my mind, with what people should be concerned with, which is how many people are hospitalized and how many people are dying. If you want to worry about the significance, that's what has to be dealt with. The hospitalization rates are up a bit, but nothing that justifies these mask mandates. And what's interesting right now, Peter, is that no one is going along with it. Erie County is isolated. I think that people are starting to take a look at what's occurring. I know this is anecdotal, but I talked to a few people that went to the Pretty Woman last night at Shays, and it was you got to wear a mask there, but everybody had their mask on when the lights went off. 2/3 of the auditorium took their masks off because people aren't afraid of that.
Well, you were sitting down. When you're sitting down, you can't get the virus, can you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as opposed to standing up. But again, Shays is probably pretty well done. Outdoors, it is almost impossible to get it. So the idea of wearing a mask in a stadium, an outdoor stadium, is ludicrous. It doesn't have any benefit really indoors. Unless people's wearing an N95, which is maybe 40% effective, or a respirator.
There's a message up here. It says too many experts, too many contrasting messages, no trust. Is that a pretty good summary of where we are right now?
Yeah, I think the government, in my mind, has an obligation to tell people the truth and to make suggestions. And in important times, you have to do something about it. We're not suggesting. Everybody talks about this Jacobson case, Supreme Court case. And what happened there in 1905 or thereabouts was the Supreme Court said the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had passed a law. This wasn't an executive fiat. They passed a law that said that local municipalities can require people to get the smallpox vaccine, and if they didn't, the criminal penalty was $5, which in today's dollars, I did some calculations, about $35. So that was the penalty. So that was challenged, and it was challenged on purpose by the person that did it. This was they wanted to take a look at the legalities here, and the Supreme Court, in my mind, rightfully so, said in this situation, if it's a law passed by the legislature, the smallpox death rate is 30%. The vaccine that they had been around for hundreds of years. That's where the name vaccine came from. Cowpox, vacca is Latin, and that's for cow, and that's where the name came from. So they had a vaccine that was very effective. They had seen it for hundreds of years. It wasn't killing people or doing anything bad. And they said you've got a 30% death rate. In that situation, the government has a right to protect its citizens, and it should. It should in that situation. That's what. But what we have now is we don't have a law passed by the legislature. We have executive fiats that are saying this is what we're going to require you to do. There's very little pushback. When you tell people they're going to die, people do whatever they're told to do. There are some people out there that are concerned about the Constitution and individual liberties, but most aren't. We are. We're lawyers, so we have a concern about that in terms of our Constitution, because at some point there is something to be said in this country, in a democracy, for people to make up their own mind about what they want to do, especially when it comes to their medical care. If you're hurting somebody else, that's a different story. If you're running around with smallpox, then you know what? The government has to say, yeah, you can't do that, man. You're not allowed to go out and infect other people with something that can kill them. This is different in terms of what's taking place here. This is not a killer. It's a virus. And what we have right now, we don't really know the long-term impact of these vaccinations. So it makes more sense, in our mind, to say, okay, let's at least let people, give them the information. Those that want to get vaccinated, let them get vaccinated. If people want to wear a face mask, wear a face mask. The issue is, though, at least get some good information and make a knowledgeable decision.
The threat that exists right now from our county executive is that if this doesn't slow the spread, his mask mandate, that we will have a vaccine requirement, limits on business and shutdowns again if the numbers, quote, don't improve. What's the likelihood of that in your opinion?
That's what most of our clients are worried about, is the vaccine mandate, because they've got a lot of employees that are opposed to it, and they're afraid that they won't be able to operate.
And this thing from the president in terms of in January, if you've got 100 employees or more like we do, that we're under a whole new set of restrictions as of in January.
Yeah, he's done that under OSHA as well as under the Medicare, the CMS. There's two methods that he's trying to impose this on the country. Again, this is an executive fiat, so that's an interesting case. Looks like it's going to go to the Sixth Circuit. And there's going to be some constitutional challenges there. I read the decision by the Fifth Circuit that said this is an easy decision. OSHA, the president, doesn't have the power to impose a vaccine mandate under these situations. Other courts, though, like even our own department, our second department here, Second Circuit, they feel that we have a pandemic. The president can basically do whatever is necessary to protect its population. So you have polar opposites in terms of what's taking place. And I won't deny the fact that most judges are ruling in favor of the government. And that's what scares me. They're listening to what they're told. I don't know if you know anybody that's actually taken a look at the studies. It's complicated stuff. Even if you read it, there's a real issue as to whether you're going to understand it. That's where the government has an obligation to kind of tell the truth to its citizens.
Well, I don't know anyone who's done the research that you've done, and that's why I asked you to be on the show today, because I go into our offices and we're complying. We're doing what we're told to do, and we've got people that are nervous because of what they've heard. And I don't want people to shy away from each other as they pass each other in the hall. Unless, I don't know, is there reason for people to be afraid of one another?
Not in my mind if you are reasonably healthy and you're under the age of 60, because at some point it's also true that that if you have the symptoms, you're coughing or sneezing and doing things like that, that you're probably more likely to transmit it. If anybody comes to work and they've got a cold or a virus or whatever, they shouldn't be at work anyway. But at our office, I would estimate that probably a third to a half of lawyers and employees are wearing masks. We're not mandating that they not wear masks. We're saying it's up to you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with people that come in. I would think the people that come in, I know you do real estate. We do more residential real estate than anybody in Western New York, maybe even in the state. And so we have people coming in all the time. And we don't say wear a mask or don't. It's up to that individual. Most of the time when we're doing closings within the office, people have masks on. To me, I look at it and I know the studies, but I'm not going to go out there and start preaching. I'm on your show because I think the public has a right to know this. I want people to read the studies, take a look at what's going on. I think the truth needs to be brought out, and that's kind of what our clients want. I've got all kinds of parents now, mostly mothers, hundreds, that are worried about this mask mandate for their kids. When you read the potential damage of a kid wearing a mask, first of all, if you are wearing a mask and you put your hands all over it, it's contaminated. And if you don't wash it every day, it's kind of you're making things worse. And when you're dealing with kids and they're learning how to, especially young kids, 2-year-olds having to wear a mask. What that does long-term psychologically to them in terms of looking around and the fear or seeing people running around with masks, they're not sure of. But I have not talked to any psychologist, any neuropsychologist that has told me it's a good thing. The ones I've talked to said the best is that hopefully we get through it. But most of them say there's going to be some psychological impact, not on everybody, but on a lot of these kids.
You're talking about the public health impact, which there's been several studies done, as you cite, and there's going to be more because it's shocking, I think, the impact on a young person. Think about when you were a freshman in high school and how important that year was just in socialization. Someone texted about the fact that there was a dog wagging his tail is an indication of how the dog is feeling, and just like a smile is an indication of how we're feeling, and that's an important part of communication. Just like your dog telling you he's happy with something, it's when someone looks at you and they smile.
Of course.
It's a form of communication that's terminated through a mask. But let's assume that there's enough, there's more and more data that's going to be accumulated on the public health impact of this. Have you read any data on the economic impact of all the shutdowns, the real dollar value of this?
Yeah, and I know that when we're dealing with what the government has spent, that the revenues they spent about $6 trillion, and the actual costs were something like $3 trillion, and they're wondering what about inflation. But the stuff I've read, when it talks about the damage to the economy long term, is in the trillions of dollars. You can't. Especially when you look at it worldwide. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's going to have an impact for years to come. People are getting a little bit of a taste of it right now, I suppose, with in terms of buying certain things where you can't get cars are expensive, that kind of thing. But it's not like this is going to be something that's going to be taken care of overnight. There are plenty of businesses right now that are having a very difficult time getting people to work, and the actual measurements of that. I think people basically say, you know what? Well, we have lives at stake, and so we'll pay any price for that. Well, it doesn't mean that you can't do both. It doesn't mean you can't be smart about treating people that have COVID. You can't protect the vulnerable, and also allow your society to hum along. Maybe not 100% efficiency, but maybe 95%.
Last question about natural immunity, because we've had a couple comments about that. By text and also by phone. I'm sorry we couldn't get to calls today. We just don't have the time today. And we'll try to get to this in future shows. But the natural immunity thing is there's a difficulty in just getting a test to find out if you have the immunities. Maybe you caught COVID and you didn't have any side effects at all. But you have the immunity now.
Sure.
But people don't seem to be talking about that at all in terms of the measurement of the population as we get towards this thing called herd immunity.
Yeah, a lot of the nurses and the healthcare workers we represent, hundreds, several hundred, we've asked them to go out and get antibody studies. As I mentioned to you, I've had a number of clients tell me that they've asked their doctor for a prescription so they could go out and get an antibody test, and their doctors won't give it to them. And I think that's, I've had other physicians tell me that violates their oath, because there's a real good argument to be made that if somebody has natural immunity, which is what all vaccines strive to give you, but if somebody has natural immunity, you should not be giving them the vaccine because you are subjecting them to a risk that's unnecessary. And there was a good case that came up. It was settled out of court where there was a professor, and he had natural immunity. His doctor said, I'm not going to vaccinate him because I think the vaccine potentially can be harmful to him. And the professor filed a lawsuit against the school, college, and they settled the case out of court where the school conceded in that case. So natural immunity, I think, is the way out of this. And it's going to happen. This is a highly contagious virus, so you're going to have a high percentage, maybe like measles. Maybe you need 90% or something like that before it effectively shuts it down. But that's, and it may not shut it down completely. It's going to be like the flu. We don't shut the flu down. Every year, people go out and get their flu shots. They try to guess what they think the closest to the variant's going to be, but we deal with it.
We're running out of time here today,
Sure.
Corey, and I appreciate you being with us today. It's been highly informative, at least for me, and I hope for our listeners as well. And as we look forward in this whole situation, I think one of the outcomes of this is going to be the impact on voting rights, for example, and that's a whole other story. But if our listeners wanted to learn more or get in touch with you, perhaps hire you for their own situation as it pertains to this, how would they reach you?
Probably the easiest thing is to go to our website, HoganWillig, and we've got a portion of it devoted to COVID-19. We're trying to provide all kinds of information out there.
Corey Hogan, thank you very much for being with us today.
Look, I enjoyed it.
I'd like to thank our listeners. We'll be back next week at the same time. And remember, when it comes to real estate, all of upstate is Hunt Country.
WBEN Buffalo, WKSE3 HD3 Niagara Falls.
An Odyssey station. 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 An Odyssey station.